So moving on a little bit to chemical compounds. So we just were talking about a single atom with single parts. So an atom made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Now we're going to talk about compounds. What are some compounds? Ways that they're put together to make things like water. So a compound is a combination of two or more elements in definite proportions. So you know water is H2O. It's got 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Those are definite proportions that a molecule of water is always going to have. The physical and chemical properties of a compound are usually very different from the elements which it's formed. So let's give an example of that. So hydrogen, found by itself, is normally a gas. Oxygen, found by itself, is normally a gas. When hydrogen and oxygen come together, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, we end up with a liquid, which is water. So they're usually very different once combined than they are individual in a chemical compound. All right, so chemical compounds. What holds a hydrogen to an oxygen? We kind of have to know about chemical bonds to understand chemical compounds. So there are 4 different types of bonds that ultimately we're going to talk about over the course of this biochemistry unit. And a bond is something that holds the atoms in a compound together. So the 4 types are ionic, covalent, hydrogen, and peptide bonds. This particular section of notes is just going to hit on the first 2, and then when we talk about water, we'll talk about hydrogen bonding, and then when we talk about carbon compounds, we'll talk a little more about peptide bonds. So an ionic bond is a bond where electrons are transferred from one atom to another. So that would be like me saying I have $1 and transferring my dollar to you, giving it to you. Instead of sharing the dollar, we would transfer. One atom loses an electron and it becomes positive, because remember the nucleus is positive, the electrons are negative. So if I give an electron away, I become positive. An atom that gets another electron becomes negatively charged. So I was neutral, you gave me something negative, I become negative. For example, sodium gives an electron to chloride, becoming Na plus and Cl. So sodium chloride is table salt. And I'll have an example for you of that in a second. So here's an example, sodium fluoride. So sodium gives its electron to fluoride. The 2 then, the sodium becomes positive, the fluoride is negative, and the 2 are now sodium fluoride as one compound. An ionic bond creates ions, that's that positive and negatively charged atoms. So here when we're talking about sodium chloride, which is table salt, the sodium becomes a positive ion, which we just write with a little plus at the top. Chloride becomes a negative ion, which we write with just a little negative at the top. And because table salt has trillions of sodium and chloride ions, they are strongly attached to each other because positive and negative are attracted. So opposites attract to each other, creating that strong force that holds table salt together.